The sensor screens went crazy with warnings. Lieutenant Nina Akoy pressed her fingers against the earpiece, trying to make sense of the jumbled signals flooding through the communication systems. Something was out there in the darkness of space, and whatever it was had just noticed them too. Captain Richard Hayes leaned forward in his command chair, studying the readings with calm eyes that had seen 20 years of deep space exploration. The Everest had jumped into this sector 3 minutes ago, and already they had company. The massive human vessel hung silent in the void, its 3-kilometer hull reflecting the distant light of a blue giant star. Every system hummed with restrained power, waiting for orders that Hayes was in no hurry to give. Across the vast emptiness of space, Commander Trell watched his own screens with growing disbelief. His scout fleet of 12 vessels had been mapping this region for 6 cycles, and nothing had ever appeared like this before. The energy signature was impossible. No ship should generate that much power. No species he knew would dare build something so massive. Observer Plick stood behind Trell's command station, his young eyes wide as he recorded everything. This would be his first major discovery, his first report to the Consortium archives. But the excitement in his chest was quickly turning to fear. The alien vessel was enormous. It made their largest battleships look like transport shuttles. Hayes received the preliminary scan results from his science team. 12 ships, unknown design, holding position at 200,000 kilometers. Their weapons were powered down, but their formation suggested military discipline. He tapped the controls on his armrest, bringing up Admiral Foster's face on a secure channel back to Earth Command. The Admiral looked tired. He always looked tired these days. Humanity's expansion into deep space was moving faster than anyone had predicted, and Foster carried the weight of keeping everyone safe. His gray beard had grown longer since their last conversation, and new lines creased his forehead. Hayes kept his voice steady and professional. The unknown vessels were smaller than anything humans built for military purposes, but there were enough of them to cause serious problems if things went wrong. Foster listened without interrupting, then gave the only order that made sense. Make peaceful contact. Show no aggression unless fired upon first. The Everest was powerful enough to defend itself, but starting an interstellar war would help no one. Nina worked on isolating the alien communication frequencies. Her background in linguistics had landed her this assignment, though she had spent years studying human languages before this. Alien communication was something else entirely. The signals were there, complex patterns of energy that clearly carried information, but making sense of them was another challenge completely. Trell made his decision. His ships would maintain their distance and observe. He sent a priority message back to Consortium Command, marking it urgent. First contact protocols existed for situations like this, though they had not been used in living memory. The last time the Consortium encountered a new spacefaring species, it had been 300 cycles ago, and that meeting had been peaceful. But the other 2 times in Consortium history, when they had met species who built Titan-class warships, those encounters had ended in war. Massive vessels like the one before him were not exploration ships. They were planet killers, weapons designed to carry enough firepower to break entire fleets. The fact that this species had built one meant they had enemies, or they planned to become someone's enemy soon. Plick studied the alien ship's design through their long-range sensors. It was crude by Consortium standards, inefficient in dozens of ways that immediately stood out to his trained eye. The humans used brute force solutions where elegant engineering would work better. But that crude design also meant incredible durability. The hull was thick enough to withstand weapons fire that would shred their own vessels. The power generation was wasteful, but it also meant they had energy to spare for shields, weapons, and anything else they might need. Hayes authorized the broadcast of friendship signals. The Everest began transmitting on every frequency they could generate, showing mathematical patterns that any technological species should recognize. Prime numbers, pi, simple equations that proved intelligence and peaceful intent. Nina added harmonic patterns to the transmission. Hopping music might convey what words could not. The alien fleet picked up the broadcasts immediately. Trell listened to the analysis from his communications officer. The patterns were clearly intentional, clearly designed to communicate. But communicate what? Without understanding their language or their culture, any transmission could mean anything. The humans might be saying hello. They might be issuing demands. They might be counting down to an attack. 3 more consortium vessels emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the sector, reinforcements responding to Trell's initial report. They took up positions around the perimeter, weapons systems ready but not activated. The situation was growing more complicated by the moment. More ships meant more firepower if things went wrong, but they also meant more commanders with different opinions about how to handle this situation. Hayes saw the new arrivals on his tactical display. His jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of tension he allowed himself to show. The aliens were calling in backup. That could mean many things, and not all of them were good. He ordered the Everest to hold its current position and maintain peaceful broadcasts. Running would make them look guilty of something. Advancing would appear aggressive. Sitting still and continuing to transmit friendship was their best option. Admiral Foster's next message arrived with new orders. A diplomatic team was being assembled on Earth. They would arrive in 4 days if the Everest could keep the situation peaceful that long. 4 days of sitting in space, surrounded by unknown aliens. Hopping nobody's trigger finger got too nervous. Hayes acknowledged the orders and settled deeper into his chair. This was going to be a long week. Across the emptiness between the fleets, Trell wondered the same thing. Consortium Command had dispatched Admiral Khan with a full battle group. 47 ships were now en route to this sector. They would arrive in 2 days. Until then, Trell had to keep watching this mysterious human vessel and hope that his scout fleet did not accidentally start the next galactic war. Admiral Khan received the reports while his battle group was still in hyperspace. His species lived longer than most in the consortium, and he had commanded fleets for 60 cycles, long enough to know that Titan-class warships meant trouble. Always had, always would. The images showed a vessel that should not exist. 3 kilometers of armor and weapons, power signatures that matched small stars, and shield generators strong enough to deflect asteroid impacts. Khan had studied the history records. The last time the consortium faced ships like this, they had lost 17 worlds before finally stopping the invasion. That war had ended 200 cycles ago, but the scars remained in their collective memory. He gave orders to his fleet commanders. Battle formations, maximum readiness. Prepare for engagement but do not fire without his direct authorization. Khan believed in caution, but he also believed in being prepared. The human vessel would see 47 consortium warships arrive and understand what that meant. Submit to inspection, leave peacefully, or face overwhelming force. Back on the Everest, Dr. Raymond Cole studied the alien ship designs from the sensor data. His background in xenobiology had expanded into xenotechnology out of necessity. The aliens used energy systems humans were still trying to perfect. Their hull materials were lighter and stronger than anything Earth's factories could produce. Each vessel was a work of art, efficient and elegant in ways that human engineering rarely achieved. But they were also fragile. Cole ran the calculations 3 times to make sure. One direct hit from the Everest's main cannons would punch through those hulls like they were made of paper. The aliens had clearly never needed to build ships tough enough to take serious damage. Their wars must have been fought differently, or maybe they had not fought many wars at all. Ensign David Park monitored the tactical displays with growing anxiety. More alien ships kept appearing at the edges of sensor range. They were not attacking, not yet, but they were definitely surrounding the Everest. Classic encirclement pattern. Something he had studied at the academy. Trap the enemy, cut off escape routes, then either force surrender or destroy them completely. He reported the formations to Hayes, who nodded slowly. The captain had already noticed. Hard not to when your sensors showed dozens of ships taking up positions all around you. Hayes considered their options carefully. They could jump back to human space, but that might look like running from a fight. It might also lead the aliens straight to Earth. Staying put was dangerous, but potentially less dangerous than leading hostile aliens home. Nina finally broke through one layer of the alien communications. Not enough to understand their language, but enough to recognize emotional content. The broadcasts from the alien fleet carried patterns that matched fear responses across dozens of species. High-frequency variations, rapid changes in intensity, repetitive warning structures. The aliens were scared of them. The realization hit her hard. Humans were the scary ones in this situation. The Everest was the monster that had appeared in the darkness. She tried to imagine how it must look from outside, a vessel built like a fortress, bristling with weapons, generating enough power to run a small city. Humans built things to survive the worst conditions imaginable because Earth had taught them to expect disasters. Other species might not think that way. She brought her findings to Hayes, who absorbed the information with characteristic calm. It made sense. It also made their situation more delicate. Scared people made bad decisions. Scared military commanders with weapons charged made even worse decisions. Hayes ordered the Everest's weapons systems to power down completely. It left them vulnerable, but it also sent a clear message. Trell saw the human ship's weapons go offline on his displays. His tactical officer confirmed it twice, unable to believe what the sensors showed. The massive vessel had just made itself defenseless against their entire fleet. Either the humans were suicidally confident, or they genuinely wanted peace enough to take that risk. He sent the data to Khan immediately. This changed everything. Species that planned to attack did not turn off their weapons when surrounded. The humans might actually be peaceful explorers who just happened to have terrible timing and even worse ship design choices. Khan reviewed the same data with deep suspicion. In his experience, traps always looked like opportunities. The human ship had turned off its weapons, but it still had shields, still had engines, still had that impossible power generation that could bring all systems back online in moments. This could be a trick to make them lower their guard before the humans struck. The Consortium Council met in emergency session through holographic links. Council Speaker Mern presided over representatives from all 23 member species. The debate was fierce. Some argued for immediate preemptive strike while the human ship was vulnerable. Others called for more observation. A few voices advocated for attempting communication despite the risks. Delegate Shira spoke up from the chamber floor. Her species had been nearly wiped out in a war centuries ago before the consortium formed. She knew what extinction looked like, and she knew what jumping to violent conclusions cost. The humans had made peaceful gestures. Mathematics, harmonics, now powering down weapons. At what point did defensive caution become aggressive paranoia? Hayes waited. It was the hardest part of command, the waiting. His crew looked to him for answers he did not have. The diplomatic team from Earth was still 3 days away. The alien fleet had grown to 47 ships and was still growing. And somewhere in the space between them, invisible lines were being drawn that would determine if humanity's first contact with aliens ended in friendship or bloodshed. Lieutenant Ben Wood stood at his weapons station, hands hovering over controls that currently did nothing. His career had been built on being ready for anything. Now the captain had ordered him to be ready for nothing, to sit defensively while potential enemies surrounded them. It went against every instinct he had developed in 15 years of service. But he also understood the bigger picture. One wrong move, one jumpy finger on a trigger, and this turned into a shooting war that nobody wanted. The Everest could probably destroy half the alien fleet before going down, maybe more. That was not victory, though. That was just mutual destruction and the start of something much worse. Plix continued recording everything for the archives. Whatever happened next would become part of consortium history. First contact with a species called humans, a species that built impossible ships and then turned off their weapons, a species that either had more courage than sense or understood something about peace that the consortium had forgotten in their centuries of comfortable security. The fleets watched each other across the void, both sides armed, both sides afraid, both sides hoping someone would figure out how to step back from the edge before it was too late. The warning came through every system at once. Weapons lock detected. Multiple sources. The Everest's defensive computers did not wait for human authorization. Shield generators surged to full power in microseconds, creating layers of protective energy around the massive hull. Khan's fleet had arrived and immediately assumed tactical positions. His orders were clear. Lock targeting systems on the human vessel. Show them the reality of their situation. 47 consortium warships against one alien ship, no matter how large. Hayes felt his stomach tighten but kept his expression neutral. The bridge crew looked to him for guidance as alarm lights flashed amber across their stations. David's hands moved toward the weapons controls by instinct, years of training screaming at him to return fire. Hayes stopped him with a quiet word. Not yet. They could still walk this back. But the Everest's computers had other ideas. Automated defensive systems registered the targeting locks as hostile action and responded according to their programming. Countermeasure systems activated. Targeting sensors painted every alien ship with return locks. In the span of 3 seconds, the situation went from tense standoff to mutual assured destruction. Khan saw his tactical board light up red. The human ship had weapons lock on every vessel in his fleet. Impossible. No targeting computer should be able to track that many individual targets simultaneously. The humans had technology the consortium had not even theorized yet, or they were bluffing with sophisticated sensor spoofing. Either way, his officers were shouting for permission to fire. Hayes made a decision that went against every military manual ever written. He ordered Lieutenant Ben Woods to take the weapons offline again, all of them, completely. Ben stared at him like he had lost his mind. They were surrounded by hostile aliens with weapons charged, and the captain wanted to disarm. The order was repeated, louder this time. Hayes locked eyes with his weapons officer until the younger man nodded and began the shutdown sequence. The Everest's targeting locks disappeared one by one. Power routing to the main cannon ceased. Missile tubes sealed. Every offensive system went dark, leaving only shields and engines active. Trell watched in amazement. The human ship had just done the impossible twice in one day. First, they powered down when surrounded. Then, when threatened directly, they powered down again instead of shooting back. Either humans had absolutely no sense of self-preservation, or they were the most committed to peace that any species he had ever encountered. Delegate Shira saw the same data from the council chamber and immediately started speaking before the War Hawks could react. The humans had been threatened with weapons lock and responded by disarming completely. That was not the action of an invasion force. That was someone desperately trying to avoid violence at any cost. She demanded the council order Khan to stand down before this turned into a massacre. Council Speaker Myrn agreed. Orders went out to the fleet admiral. Cease hostile targeting. Maintain defensive positions but make no aggressive moves. Khan protested. The humans could bring weapons back online in moments. This was clearly a tactical deception. Myrn overruled him. The humans had now demonstrated peaceful intent multiple times. Continuing to threaten them was making the consortium look like the aggressors. Nina worked frantically at her station, trying to convey meaning through the limited translation they had achieved. She broadcasted simple concepts in every format she could devise. Friend, peace, no harm, understanding. The words were broken, the grammar probably nonsense. But the intent had to come through somehow. On the consortium flagship, a junior communications officer picked up the human transmissions. The translation matrix was crude but functional. The humans were saying they meant no harm. They were confused about why this was happening. They wanted to understand. The officer brought the transmission to Trell, who had transferred to Khan's ship when the fleet arrived. Khan read the partial translations with narrowed eyes. Easy to broadcast peaceful words while maintaining overwhelming military capability. But Trell pointed out something else in the data. The human communications showed genuine confusion. Their questions were not demands or threats. They were actually asking what they had done wrong. What had provoked this response? Private Amy Rogers stood at an observation window in the Everest's lower decks, watching the alien ships through reinforced glass. She was a Marine, trained for boarding actions and ship defense. But right now she was just a human looking at something beautiful. The alien vessels were nothing like human ships. They curved and flowed like living things, their hulls catching starlight in ways that created shifting patterns of color. She wondered what the aliens looked like, whether they had families waiting at home, worried about them the same way her family worried about her, whether alien soldiers stood at their own observation windows right now, looking at the Everest and wondering the same things she wondered. The universe was so much bigger than she had imagined before joining the fleet. Big enough for everyone, if people could just stop being afraid long enough to talk. Dr. Cole had an idea. Mathematics had been their first attempt at communication. Music had been their second, both were abstract. What if they tried something more direct? He suggested broadcasting images, simple pictures of Earth, humans, cities, children playing, families, art. Show the aliens who humans actually were instead of just what human ships looked like. Hayes approved immediately. Within minutes, Nina was assembling a visual package, photos from Earth's archives, videos of human life, nothing military, nothing that could be misinterpreted as threatening, just people being people. She added images of human exploration throughout history, ships sailing unknown oceans, astronauts walking on the moon, rovers on Mars, a species driven by curiosity, not conquest. The visual package transmitted across space at light speed. It reached the consortium fleet and played on their displays. Trell watched images of a blue world covered in water and green continents, cities that stretched to horizons, but also forests and mountains and creatures of every kind. He saw humans of different colors and sizes, all clearly the same species but wonderfully diverse. Plix recorded everything with trembling hands. The images showed a young civilization. The humans had only recently achieved spaceflight based on the progression of their exploration. Their cities were crowded. Their world was precious to them, and their children looked up at the stars the same way young consortium citizens did, with wonder and hope. Shira presented the images to the full council. She let them play without commentary. Let her fellow representatives see what the humans had chosen to share. Not weapons specifications, not military might, not demands or threats, just a portrait of themselves as people who wanted to explore, to learn, to meet others among the stars. Myrn watched the images in silence. Then she made a decision that would echo through consortium history. Open a direct channel to the human ship, attempt real communication, and prepare to send a diplomatic shuttle to meet them halfway. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A consortium linguistics program designed for archaeological work on dead languages found patterns in the human transmissions. Not perfect translation, but enough to convey basic meaning. The computer started assembling a crude dictionary, matching human words to consortium concepts through context and repetition. Nina saw her own translation matrix suddenly improve by orders of magnitude. Something on the alien side was meeting her halfway. She could now understand fragments of their transmissions. Words like protect, territory, danger, and history came through clearly. The aliens were afraid because of their past, not because of anything humans had actually done. She reported this to Hayes, who felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Fear he could work with. Fear could be addressed through patience and understanding. Actual hostility would have been much harder to overcome. He authorized a new transmission, this time using the improved translation. The humans explained they were explorers, new to this region of space, unaware they had entered someone else's territory. They apologized for the intrusion and requested peaceful dialogue. Khan read the human message 3 times. His military instincts still screamed trap, but the political reality was shifting around him. The council wanted peace. His own officers were questioning why they were threatening a species that kept apologizing and disarming themselves. Even Trell, whose scout fleet had started this whole situation, was advocating for diplomatic contact. But someone else was not convinced. Captain Lawrence Wright commanded one of the consortium's heavy destroyers on the fleet's outer perimeter. His species had suffered terribly in the last Titan-class war. Their homeworld had burned. Their population had dropped by 2/3 before the consortium finally stopped the invasion. Wright looked at the massive human ship and saw his nightmares made real. His weapons officer asked about the stand-down order. Wright ignored it. One ship could disobey without triggering a full battle. One ship could test whether the humans were truly peaceful or just waiting for an opportunity. His crew protested. Orders from the council speaker herself were not suggestions. Wright pulled rank and issued firing commands. The energy beam lanced across space and struck the Everest's port side. Shields absorbed most of it, but the impact still sent shockwaves through the hull. Damage control alarms screamed. Pete Harris and his engineering team raced toward the affected section as atmospheric breach warnings activated. Hayes gripped his armrest hard enough to leave marks. Every instinct demanded he return fire. His crew was hurt. His ship was damaged. The target was locked in their computers, even with weapons offline. Ben could have the guns back online in 30 seconds and that alien ship would cease to exist. But Hayes had been in command long enough to know the difference between an attack and a mistake. One ship had fired. 46 others had not. That meant this was not a coordinated assault. It was one rogue captain or an accident. If Hayes retaliated now, every ship in the consortium fleet would light them up. The Everest would take dozens of ships down before dying, and humanity's first contact with aliens would end in mutual slaughter. He kept his voice steady and gave orders his crew did not want to follow. No return fire. Damage report. Continue peaceful transmissions. Show the aliens that humanity could take a hit without losing control. Dr. Susan Reeves rushed to the impact site with her medical team. 3 crew members had been thrown against bulkheads when the ship rocked. Minor injuries, nothing critical, but they were still human beings in pain because someone had shot at them. She treated their wounds while listening to the chatter on the shipwide communication. Everyone wanted to shoot back. Everyone was angry, but the captain's orders held. Khan's response was immediate and harsh. Wright was placed under arrest. 2 consortium ships moved to bracket his vessel and ensure he could not fire again. Khan sent an emergency transmission to the human ship on all frequencies. Unauthorized action, not sanctioned by command. The offending vessel was being detained. Please do not interpret as official aggression. Nina translated as fast as the system would allow. The aliens were apologizing, explaining, making it clear this was not what their leadership wanted. She reported to Hayes, who nodded slowly. Good. That matched his read of the situation, but they had still been shot at. They had still taken damage. The Everest's crew needed to know their captain would not let that pass completely unanswered. Hayes composed a response carefully. The Everest acknowledged the unauthorized nature of the attack. Humans understood that accidents and rogue actors existed in any military force. Humans themselves had dealt with similar situations throughout their history. However, this incident demonstrated the urgent need for face-to-face diplomatic contact before misunderstandings escalated further. He added one more line. The human ship would remain in defensive posture only, but would defend itself if fired upon again. Clear, direct, and firm without being threatening. Myrn received the human response in the council chamber. She felt relief wash over her. The humans had been attacked and chose to believe the consortium's explanation rather than retaliating. That showed incredible restraint or incredible desperation. Either way, it gave them an opening to actually talk. She issued new orders immediately. Prepare a diplomatic shuttle. Select a qualified representative. Send them to meet the humans in neutral space. Delegate Shira volunteered before anyone else could speak. She was not military. She was not afraid of the human ship, and her people had learned centuries ago that peace was always worth the personal risk. The council approved her mission within minutes. Hayes received notification that an alien shuttle was launching. His tactical officers confirmed it was small, unarmed, moving slowly on a direct intercept course. This was it, actual face-to-face contact. He called for volunteers from his crew. Dozens of hands went up, but he selected Amy Rogers. The private had no diplomatic training, but she had the right attitude. Curious, not afraid. Eager to meet aliens rather than fight them. Ambassador Patricia Lane had been aboard the Everest the entire time, sent from Earth in case first contact happened during the mission. She had been stuck in her quarters while the military situation played out. Now her moment had arrived. She joined Hayes and Amy in the shuttle bay, reviewing everything she knew about first contact protocols. Most of it was theory. Nobody had actually done this before. The human shuttle launched toward the designated meeting point. The alien shuttle did the same from the opposite direction. Both sides watched their displays as the small craft approached each other. Two shuttles, surrounded by massive fleets, carrying the hopes of entire civilizations in their passenger compartments. Pete Harris finished his damage assessment. The hull breach was sealed. Systems were back to normal. Casualties were minimal. The Everest had taken a hit and survived. He reported to Hayes that the ship was ready for whatever came next. Hayes watched the shuttle icons converge on his tactical display. Whatever came next would not be decided by weapons or ships or military might. It would be decided by whether two different species could sit in a room together and find common ground. The shuttles docked with a soft metallic click that echoed through both vessels. Patricia Lane took a deep breath and checked her translation device one more time. Amy stood beside her, wearing full dress uniform instead of combat gear. They had debated that choice for 10 minutes before deciding that looking military was less important than looking respectful. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Patricia stepped through first and found herself face to face with something beautiful. Delegate Shira stood barely 5 feet tall, her crystalline skin refracting the shuttle's lights into soft rainbow patterns. Her large eyes were dark but expressive, and when she spoke, her voice had a musical quality that the translator struggled to capture. Behind Shira stood historian Quell, taller and thinner, his features sharp and angular where hers were smooth. He carried a recording device and watched everything with academic fascination. Patricia introduced herself and Amy, using the slow, careful pronunciation the translation system worked best with. Shira responded with her own introduction, then did something unexpected. She reached out a delicate hand toward Patricia, who understood the gesture instinctively and met it with her own. First physical contact between human and alien. The touch lasted only a moment, but both beings felt the significance. Hands looked different, but they served the same purpose across the galaxy. They moved to the shuttle's common area, where chairs had been arranged in a neutral configuration. Amy found herself sitting across from Quell, who could not stop staring at her. She smiled slightly and asked if something was wrong. The translator caught most of it. Quell explained he was just amazed by the diversity of human appearance. The images they had seen showed humans of many colors, but seeing it in person was different. Patricia began the difficult conversation they had come to have. She explained Earth's history honestly, knowing that hiding the truth would only cause problems later. Humans were a young species, barely a century into spaceflight. They had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times through warfare, environmental damage, and social collapse. The Titan-class warships were built not for conquest, but because humanity had learned the hard way to prepare for the worst. Shira listened carefully, her expression shifting through emotions Patricia was learning to read. Concern, surprise, and something that might have been sadness. She asked the question that had been on every consortium mind since the Everest appeared. Why did humans achieve spaceflight before achieving peace? Patricia did not have a good answer. She could only explain what she knew. Humans were stubborn. They competed with each other even when cooperation would serve them better. National pride and fear had driven the early space race. Later, the need to find resources and living space as Earth's population grew had pushed them further. Peace had come gradually, after seeing their planet from space and realizing how small and fragile it actually was. Quell found this fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. He explained that most consortium species had developed differently. They achieved internal harmony first, often through near-extinction events that taught them cooperation was survival. Only after uniting their worlds did they develop interstellar capability. Humans had done it backwards, carrying their conflicts into space with them. Amy asked about the Titan-class ships that had attacked the consortium centuries ago. Shira's expression darkened. She described the war in careful detail. The invaders had come from outside known space, in ships even larger than the Everest. They had demanded submission and resources. When the consortium refused, the invaders began destroying planets. 17 worlds had burned before the consortium developed weapons capable of stopping them. The war had lasted 30 cycles and cost billions of lives. It had united the consortium species in ways nothing else could, but it had also left deep scars. Every species that had survived remembered the sight of Titan-class warships appearing in their skis. That fear was burned into their cultural memory. Patricia understood then why the consortium had reacted so strongly to the Everest. They were not seeing a human ship. They were seeing their worst nightmare come back. She apologized again, explaining humans had no way of knowing this history. Earth's radio telescopes had detected no signs of intelligent life in their survey of nearby space. They had built their ships for defense against hypothetical threats, not realizing they would become someone else's terror. Shira asked a difficult question. If humans were truly peaceful, why not build smaller ships? Why choose designs that maximize destructive capability? Patricia glanced at Amy, who answered honestly. Because humans planned for failure. They assumed the worst and built accordingly. It was not pretty, but it had kept humanity alive through ice ages, plagues, wars, and environmental collapse. Preparing for disaster was burned into human psychology, the same way fear of Titan-class ships was burned into consortium psychology. Quell suggested that perhaps both species could learn from each other. Humans could teach the consortium how to survive harsh conditions and prepare for threats. The consortium could teach humans how to develop elegant solutions instead of brute force ones. The conversation was moving from apologies to possibilities. They talked for 3 hours, discussing technology, culture, art, and philosophy. Patricia learned that the consortium valued efficiency and harmony above all else. Shira and Quell learned that humans valued adaptability and resilience. Both sides began to see how those different values had shaped their development. Amy shared stories about Earth, mountain ranges that took your breath away, oceans that stretched beyond sight, deserts where nothing should survive but life found a way anyway. She explained how humans drew inspiration from their planet's diversity, how every culture had different approaches to common problems. Shira listened with growing wonder. The consortium worlds were beautiful, but most were gentler than Earth. They had not needed to develop the same toughness. Admiral Foster joined the conversation via secure transmission from Earth. He had been listening to the entire meeting through Patricia's communication link. He made an offer directly to the consortium representatives. If they would send a delegation to Earth, humans would demonstrate their peaceful intentions through actions, not just words. Show them human cities, human families, human art and music. Let them see that behind the massive warships was a species that wanted nothing more than to explore and make friends. Shira consulted with Quell and agreed, but she made a counteroffer. Humans should send representatives to the consortium homeworlds as well, meet the species that had come together to survive, learn their histories, understand why Titan-class ships brought such fear. Patricia accepted immediately. Cultural exchange was exactly what they needed. Time for both sides to move past first impressions and see each other clearly. The meeting ended with agreements being drafted. The Everest would remain in place while diplomatic arrangements were finalized. The consortium fleet would withdraw to non-threatening distances, and within one cycle, delegations would begin traveling between Earth and consortium space. As they prepared to return to their respective shuttles, Shira asked one final question. The human ship was called Everest. What did that name mean? Amy smiled and explained. Everest was the tallest mountain on Earth. Humans named their first Titan-class ship after it because they wanted to remember that even the biggest obstacles could be overcome with patience and determination. You just had to take it one step at a time. Shira liked that. Perhaps humans and the consortium were not so different after all. Both were species that had survived terrible challenges. Both had learned to value something important. Now they just had to learn to value each other. 2 weeks of peaceful contact had changed everything. The Everest's crew had grown comfortable with consortium ships nearby. Some alien vessels had even approached close enough for visual observation, their crews as curious about humans as humans were about them. Hayes allowed shore leave rotations where small groups could shuttle over to consortium ships for cultural exchange. Amy had visited 3 different alien vessels and tried food that her biology should not have been able to digest, but somehow did. The consortium had been exploring the galaxy long enough to understand basic biochemistry. They shared meals with her that were safe, if strange tasting. She had learned card games that used symbols instead of numbers and discovered aliens had the same competitive spirit humans did when gambling was involved. But the peaceful routine was about to be interrupted. Long-range sensors detected something new entering the sector. Multiple ships moving fast, their energy signatures aggressive and unfamiliar. Hayes called his bridge crew to alert status and transmitted a warning to the consortium fleet. Trell received the human alert and checked his own sensors. His expression went from curious to grim in seconds. He knew those signatures. Every consortium officer knew them. The Ravagers had found them. Khan's response was immediate: battle formations. The consortium fleet began repositioning for combat. 47 ships moving in practice patterns, creating overlapping fields of fire and mutual support networks. But Khan knew they were in trouble. The Ravagers were bringing at least 60 ships, and they specialized in overwhelming force. The Ravagers were not a unified species. They were a collection of different races that had banded together for one purpose: taking what others built. They saw the consortium as soft targets, species that had grown comfortable with peace. Raider attacks had increased over the past few cycles as the Ravagers grew bolder. Scientist Vorn accessed the Ravager database from his position aboard the consortium flagship. He had studied them for years, trying to find weaknesses. The Ravagers fought differently than consortium forces. They used brute strength and numbers, wore down defenses through attrition. In one-on-one fights, consortium vessels usually won, but Ravagers never fought fair. Hayes watched the tactical situation develop. The Ravagers were positioning to hit the consortium fleet's weak side, where smaller scout ships held the line. Basic military strategy: strike where the enemy was weakest. He made a decision without consulting Earth Command. There was no time for discussions across light years. He opened a direct channel to Khan. The humans offered assistance. The Everest would move to support the consortium defense. Khan's first response was refusal. This was not humanity's fight. Humans had just met the consortium 2 weeks ago. Why risk their massive ship for strangers? Patricia answered from her position on the Everest's bridge. She had spent enough time with the consortium to speak with authority now. If humans and the consortium were going to be friends, then consortium enemies became human enemies. That was how friendship worked. You stood together when trouble came. You did not watch from the sidelines while people you cared about fought alone. Trell supported the human offer. The Everest's firepower alone matched 10 consortium ships. Having them in the defensive line could mean the difference between holding position and retreating. Khan considered this for exactly 3 seconds before agreeing. Pride was less important than survival. The Everest moved into formation alongside consortium vessels, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest alien battleships. Hayes positioned them to protect the cluster of scout ships on the vulnerable flank. If the Ravagers wanted to strike where defenses were weakest, they would have to go through humanity's Titan-class warship first. The Ravagers saw the human ship and hesitated. Their intelligence on this sector had not mentioned new species or massive vessels. The lead raider captain, whose name was unpronounceable in human terms, studied the Everest with tactical sensors. The ship was huge, but size did not always mean effectiveness. It might be a cargo hauler or colony ship. The Ravagers had captured vessels that size before. He gave orders to proceed with the attack. 60 Ravager ships accelerated toward the consortium fleet. Their formation was loose, aggressive, designed for quick strikes and rapid retreats. They opened fire at maximum range, testing defensive responses. The consortium fleet returned fire with measured precision. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles crossed space. Shields flared as impacts registered. The dance of space combat began, both sides maneuvering for advantage. The Ravagers pressed hard toward the weaker flank, exactly as Hayes had predicted. Then the Everest opened fire and everything changed. The human ship's point defense systems activated first. Dozens of small turrets tracked incoming fire with computer precision. Missiles and energy beams vanished in storms of defensive fire before they could reach consortium ships. The alien vessels that had been struggling to maintain shields under heavy assault suddenly found themselves protected by a wall of human technology. Ben Woods had his weapons back online and targeting coordinates locked. Hayes gave the authorization to fire. The Everest's main cannon spoke with a voice that echoed through the vacuum. Heavy kinetic rounds accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. They crossed the distance to Ravager ships in heartbeats. The first round punched through a Ravager destroyer's shields like they were not there, continued through the hull, and exited the other side trailing debris. The ship broke apart, its power core failing catastrophically. The second and third rounds had similar effects on different targets. Within 30 seconds, 3 Ravager vessels had ceased to exist. The remaining Ravagers stopped their advance. Their sensors finally understood what the massive human ship actually was, a warship built to standards they had never encountered, shields strong enough to ignore most of their weapons, armor thick enough to absorb anything that got through, and firepower that destroyed ships with single hits. The Ravager commander made a strategic calculation. His force could probably overwhelm the human ship if they all focused fire, but they would lose 20, maybe 30 vessels in the process. That was unacceptable. Ravagers fought for profit, not pride. There was no profit in mutual destruction. He gave orders to retreat. The Ravager fleet turned and accelerated away from the battle space. Some consortium captains wanted to pursue, but Khan ordered them to hold formation. Let the Ravagers run. The goal was defense, not revenge. Cheering erupted across consortium ships. Their fleet had not lost a single vessel. The human ship had turned what should have been a difficult battle into a rout. Hayes accepted congratulations from dozens of alien captains over the communication channels. Quell recorded everything from his position aboard a consortium science vessel. This would be one of the most important historical documents in the archives. The moment when humans proved themselves as allies rather than threats. The day when humanity's violent past became the shield that protected others. Shira transmitted a message directly to Patricia. On behalf of the Consortium Council, she formally requested an alliance with humanity. Not just friendship, not just cultural exchange. A military alliance where both sides committed to mutual defense. Patricia accepted with tears in her eyes that she tried to hide. Admiral Foster's authorization came through minutes later from Earth Command. He had been watching the battle through the Everest's data stream. The decision was already made. Humanity would stand with the Consortium. Their first friends among the stars would not stand alone. 2 more Titan-class ships were already in production on Earth. The Olympus and the Kilimanjaro would launch within the year. They would not be ships of conquest or terror. They would be shields for species that had welcomed humanity despite their fears. Protection for civilizations that had chosen peace but still needed defenders. Hayes sat in his command chair and watched Consortium ships approach the Everest in peaceful formation. Amy waved at aliens through the observation windows, receiving what had to be the equivalent of waves in return. Different species had different gestures, but the meaning was clear. Captain Yuki Tanaka would command the Olympus when she arrived. Hayes had already sent her his recommendations for first contact protocols. Be patient, be honest, show strength but never aggression, and remember that the biggest gift humanity could give the galaxy was not military power. It was the willingness to use that power to protect rather than conquer. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of people worth protecting. People who built beautiful ships and made amazing art and just wanted to explore the stars in peace. Humans understood now that strength meant nothing without purpose, and humanity's purpose had just become clear. They would be the shield that others could shelter behind. The guardians who remembered how precious peace was because they had nearly lost it themselves. The Everest turned toward Consortium space, surrounded by new allies and old friends. Somewhere behind them, the Ravagers were spreading word about the humans and their Titan-class ships. But the message would be different than anyone expected. Not monsters to fear, not conquerors to flee, just protectors who had finally found something worth fighting for.